Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in our series of Edge of Eternities Commander deck techs. Since EOE is Magic's last in-universe set for 2025, I wanted to showcase some of the cool options for commanders that it's given us beyond just the ones from the precons. I'm releasing a new Edge of Eternities Commander deck every Thursday through the end of September when the Spider-Man set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Edge of Eternities commander and a way you'd like to see me build it, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Alpharael Stonechosen. Alpharael is a principal character in the EOE fiction, a Monasteriate acolyte whose twin sister chose to plummet into the Sotheran Supervoid. After attacking the Dawnsire and fighting Sir Vondum, see my previous two commander decks, Alpharael's lifelong faith is wavering and his future is uncertain. The Edge of Eternity story is great, so I've linked it in the video's description, and I urge you to check it out. But before we get started with today's deck tech, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build around my commander. I want to show off the person I put, or the card I should say, that I put at the head of my deck. So I put 30 cards toward my game plan. It's what the deck does at the table and how it tries to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction, what people usually call draw, ramp, and removal. I have some mass removal as well in the form of 1 or 2 wraths. Sometimes I'll do more if it would play to the game plan, sometimes I don't do any, but I always have a floor of 38 lands because I want to be able to hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play Magic. So let's take a look at our commander. Alpharael Stonechosen is a 3/3 human cleric for 3 and double black with ward, discard a card at random. That's brutal. And a void ability. Whenever Alpharael attacks, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn or a spell was warped this turn, defending player loses half their life, rounded up. So that's big, but there's 2 things to know about this. The first is, this is an attack trigger. If we've met the void condition, Alpharael attacks, and this goes on the stack right then. We don't have to connect first. So if we have an opponent with 40 life and no blockers, we can attack with Alpharael. They're going to lose 20 life and then take 3 damage. So they're going to go from 40 to 17. The other thing to know is that the way Void works is it requires a non-land permanent to leave the battlefield or a spell to be warped in. This does not have to be a permanent we control. So if that opponent I mentioned had 1 blocker and we Doomblade it before attacking, a non-land permanent has left the battlefield this turn, assuming it wasn't like a Dryad Arbor. The only thing that won't trigger this, like I mentioned, are lands. So cracking and Evolving Wilds is not going to satisfy Void. So Alpharael has this fun, splashy effect attached to a requirement. We need a permanent to leave the battlefield or warp into it before combat every turn in order to trigger that Void ability. This got me thinking about the emptiness of space and the loneliness that Alpharael must feel now that his sister is gone. I had to ask, what could address that kind of poignant existential need? What would a person need to use to fill such a void? Obviously, the answer is snacks. That's right, we're playing mono black food. Half of our game plan is divided between triggering Alpharael's ability and attacking with them to lay our opponents low, and we do that by cracking food tokens to meet the void ability's requirements. But we're also playing a bit of aristocrats, sacrificing our other permanents to drain our opponents after Alpharael munches on their life totals. We aren't afraid of seeing our own life total dip either, because nothing goes better with dip than chips. In a way, our strategy resembles classic Sui Black, putting our pieces and ourselves in jeopardy because it doesn't matter that we have nothing left if we're the ones to end the game. And with the speed of Commander these days, we probably have plenty of time to snack between kills. You'll enjoy this deck if you like incremental positioning, fiddly sequencing choices, and seeing your friend's eyes bug out when you attack. So let's get into our game plan. We're going to start, I guess I should talk about how I do this. This Moxfield page with the deck list is linked in the video's description below, and at the bottom of it, you'll see a section called Considering. These are cards that I didn't put in the deck, but you absolutely could. Some of them are not in the deck because they're too expensive for the kind of budget I build for, but maybe you already own them, or maybe you have a bigger budget for building this deck. Or maybe you have a smaller one. There's plenty of cards that fit that as well. It can also help you specialize in a way that I didn't, and maybe find a different version of Alpharael Stonechosen that you enjoy. So let's get into our game plan. You'll see how I built it, starting with food. These are cards that care about food and usually make food, starting with Witch's Oven from Throne of Eldraine. For a single generic mana, we get an artifact that says tap and sacrifice a creature to create a food token. And if the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens instead. So this is a repeatable sack outlet for our creatures. Every time we sacrifice them, it will meet the void requirement, so that Alpharael's ability will trigger when we attack with them, assuming this happened before combat. And we get to put food tokens on the battlefield, which we can later crack in order to not just gain life, but satisfy that void ability's requirement. Next is Bumbleflower's Sharepot. For 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that says when it enters, it makes a food token, so we can use that token to, like I said, crack and satisfy the void requirement. But also, we can pay 5 generic mana, tap and sacrifice the Sharepot to destroy a non-land permanent, although only at a sorcery speed. So the Sharepot doesn't just give us an artifact that we can sacrifice in the form of that food token, it gives us an artifact we can sacrifice, which again, satisfies the void requirement, and in the process, blow up the scariest thing on our opponent's playmats. So good removal, albeit slow, but it comes with food. Next up is Savor. For 1 and a black, we have an instant that gives target creature -2/-2 until end of turn, and we make a food. That's all it is. We might use this as removal. We might use this as a way to attack with our 3/3 commander into a board with a 4/4. Maybe our opponent says, yeah, I'll make him have it, and blocks us with the 4/4. We hit them with a Savor. Now that 4/4 is a 2/2, it's going to die to Alpharael, and we make a food on top of it. And hopefully, we already triggered our void ability, so when Alpharael attacked, our opponent still lost half their life, even though Alpharael got blocked. So Savor, not an incredibly strong spell, but it comes with a food, and it has a good effect. Remember, giving a negative modifier to a creature's toughness can cause them to just die, even if they're indestructible. Creatures that have a toughness of 0 or less are just put into the graveyard as a state-based action. So yeah. Next up, I really like this card in this deck. The Witch's Vanity is a saga from Wilds of Eldraine for 1 and a black. Chapter 1 is destroy target creature an opponent controls with mana value 2 or less. So again, we're killing something small, but we're still killing something. And these days, cheap spells are powerful. Maybe that's even someone's commander, like their Servandum. Chapter 2 is create a food token. So that just gives us a food that we can crack to satisfy the void ability, which of course so would destroying one of these creatures. At last, create a Wicked Roll token attached to target creature you control. A Wicked Roll is a token aura that says enchanted creature gets +1/+1, and when this aura is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So the Witch's Vanity is great because it comes in for 2 mana, takes a creature off the battlefield, satisfying the void requirement. Creates a food next turn, which we can then crack and satisfy the void requirement. And then it pumps up, probably our commander, gives a way to drain life later, but most importantly, after this is done resolving, Witch's Vanity itself sacrifices, goes to the graveyard, and the sacrificing of it also triggers the void requirement, or meets the void requirement. So this is, in all likelihood, 2 mana to ensure that the next 3 turns, Alpharael's ability is online. I think it's great. Next up, we have a Dubious Delicacy from Edge of Eternities. For 2 and a black, we have a artifact Food with Flash that says when this artifact enters, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. This is similar to Savor in the sense that it's a debuff. You know, we may be able to kill something with this, or we may be able to do some kind of trickery in combat or after combat from it. Hopefully it'll happen before combat, so we can use it to trigger Alpharael. It also has the food text, so pay 2, tap and sack it to gain 3 life, but we can also pay 2, tap and sack it to make target opponent lose 3 life. So maybe an opponent has just lost half their life, we'll add insult to injury and make them lose 3 more. Then again, if this has happened several different times, if Alpharael has attacked the same player and they've halved their life multiple times, maybe this 3 life is enough to put them over the edge and just kill them. It's an acquired taste. Next up is Experimental Confectioner. This is 2 and a black for a 2/3 human peasant that when it enters, it makes a food token, helps, but also whenever you sacrifice a food, create a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block. These are the Wilds of Eldraine rats. They're 1/1s, they're rats, they can't block. That's okay. We might want to attack with them. If we do, they're likely going to die, unless the board is just clear or our opponents only have X1s to block. But what's nice about these rats is we're going to be sacrificing food left and right in this deck, which means after sacrificing food, we end up with a different token that, even though we can't block with it, we can sure sacrifice it. Maybe we have Witch's Oven in play, so we sacrifice a food, we make a rat, we sacrifice the rat to the oven, get another food. So that's 3 turns of triggering Void. A little bit of value for us as we use our foods. Next is Feed the Cauldron. Feed the Cauldron is like Eliminate, but a little bit more expensive, but it makes food. 2 and a black for an instant that says destroy target creature with mana value 3 or less. If it's your turn, create a food token. Again, not super premium removal, but there are lots of creatures that are more than mana value 3, but there's plenty of powerful ones that are cheaper than that are mana value 3 or less. You might kill your opponent's, I don't know, you might hit their commander with this. You might get their Rhystic Buddy with this, lots of different options for you. Rhystic Buddy, of course, being Esper Sentinel, if I wasn't clear. And in the process, we make a food. Next is Foreboding Fruit from Throne of Eldraine. 2 and a black for a sorcery that says target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. But it has Adamant. If we spent 3 black mana to cast a spell, we also make a food token. So in our deck, generally we're going to be spending 3 black mana on this. So we're having a player draw 2 cards, usually us, lose 2 life, we don't mind, and making a food. We can get that 2 life and more back with that food if we want to. But also, like I mentioned with Dubious Delicacy, we might have one of our opponents at 1 or 2 life, and Foreboding Fruit is worth it to say, go ahead and draw 2 cards and then die, and we'll just make a food from it. So generally this is a draw spell, but it might be more effective for us if we use it some other way. Next is Gumdrop Poisoner, also from Wilds of Eldraine. For 2 and a black, we get a 3/2 Human Warlock with lifelink. It helps us gain life. And when Gumdrop Poisoner enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the amount of life we've already gained this turn. So if we sequence this right, we can have something get -3/-3 because we've cracked a food, or maybe we've cracked multiple foods and gotten a lot more than that. But where are we getting that food? Possibly from Tempt with Treats, the adventure that comes on Gumdrop Poisoner. It's 1 black, at an instant speed, we make a food. That seems pretty good to me. Next is Midnight Snack from Foundations. For 2 and a black, we have an enchantment with Raid, which says at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked this turn, create a food token. Hopefully, we've already cracked a food this turn to activate, to get Alpharael's Void ability online. Then we attack with Alpharael, our defending player loses half their life, and then we go to our end step and we get our food back from Midnight Snack. In addition, we can pay 2 and a black and sacrifice Midnight Snack to make target opponent lose an amount of life equal to the amount of life we've gained this turn. So hopefully that's at least 3, and we're doing the same thing we were before with Dubious Delicacy or Foreboding Fruit. Just a little bit of drain might be all it takes. Next we have Bake Into a Pie. Love this spell. They reprinted it in Foundations, but it's originally from Throne of Eldraine. For 2 and double black, an instant, destroy target creature, make a food. So it's 1 more black to hit any creature, and otherwise Feed the Cauldron. And we don't have to cast it on our turn to get that food token. Just good unconditional removal. Next is, oh, I'm so sorry, Lord of the Rings lovers. This is Cirith Ungol Patrol. Forgive me if I got that wrong. For 4 and a black, this is a 4/5 Orc Soldier that says pay a generic and tap and sacrifice another creature, draw a card, and then create a food token. So this isn't just a way of repeatedly making food, it's a repeated way of drawing cards and sacrificing creatures. So we're making food, we're drawing cards, and we're triggering Void. And it's a 4/5 blocker. That's pretty good. Next is Old Flitterfang from Wilds of Eldraine's Jumpstart cards, I believe, which were only in the collector and set boosters. For 4 and a black, we have a 3/4 Rat Fairy. It's a legend, and it flies. It says, at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, create a food token. So a little bit of experimental confectioner sort of vibe, you know. This is when you sacrifice a food, you get a rat. This is if a creature died, you get a food. All right. And then for 2 and a black and sacrifice another creature or artifact, Old Flitterfang gets +2/+2 until end of turn. We might want to sacrifice a food not for the life. We may not need the life. We may want Old Flitterfang to be a 5/6 flyer. That's not bad either. Or we could sacrifice those rats to Old Flitterfang, gross, and then we're still activating Void, or qualifying for the Void trigger. Next, we have Transmutation Font from the big score. For 5 generic mana, we have an artifact that taps to make our choice of either a blood, a clue, or a food token. So food tokens, as we know, pay 2, tap, and sack to gain 3 life. Clue tokens are pay 2 and sack without having to tap it to draw a card. Blood tokens are pay 1, tap, sacrifice, and discard a card to draw a card. So we may want to make food over and over with this, and we sure can. But Transmutation Font also has the ability for us to pay 3, tap it, and sacrifice 3 artifact tokens with different names to search our library for an artifact, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle, but only at sorcery speed. Even if all we use this for is make a new food every turn, that's pretty alright. And being able to search up one of our artifacts, of which we have 18 in the deck, is also pretty nice if we don't need to keep sacrificing our food, and we can build up a food, a blood, and a clue, or any other artifact tokens we may be making. Finally, also from Lord of the Rings, we have Voracious Fell Beast. 4 and double black for a 4/4 flying Drake Beast that says when it enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and we make a food for each creature sacrificed this way. So this is solid removal. The opponents get to choose which creatures they're sacrificing, but we are getting one off of everyone's board, and we get 3 food tokens. Hopefully 3 if we have 3 opponents. It may be that we've already taken out 2 of our opponents, and we only get 1 from this. That's all right. A 4/4 flyer for 6 is completely fine. So those are our food tagged cards. We have a few other cards, at least one other card that cares about food, but these are the ones that actually make food for us. So let's move on to our next section, which of course is Void. This section I've tagged Void to mean these are cards that can trigger Void. That can, rather, it's not a trigger, but can meet the condition for a Void ability to trigger. So, for example, Embrace Oblivion. For a single black, it's a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and destroy a target creature or spacecraft. This is our Bone Splinters for the deck. I put this in here because it's from Edge of Eternities. You could obviously use a different version of this card because there's plenty of them, but it gives us a way to sacrifice an artifact or creature. It's at sorcery speed, which is fine because we want to do it before combat anyway, and it kills something. Seems okay to me. Next is Killing Wave. This card is really gross. For X and a black, this sorcery says for each creature, its controller sacrifices it unless they pay X life. So if we have our commander out and we say we're going to cast this for X equals 4, then every creature on the battlefield, its controller has to pay 4 life or sacrifice that creature. And we go through every single creature on the battlefield, including ours, which is fine. We don't mind, paying 16 life, 30 life, whatever it takes. We're going to be coming out ahead anyway. But our opponents aren't built for that. They're going to have a lot more trouble with it, especially if you've got like a tokens player at the table. Even if you're having everyone pay 1 life for each of their creatures with X equals 1, that might be 10 life for someone to keep their whole board in play. Killing Wave is pretty fun. Next up we have Nutrient Block. I think this card is great. This is a food that says for 1 generic, we get an artifact food that is indestructible. It has the food text, which is pay 2, tap and sack it to gain 3 life. But also, when this is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So this is food. That's great. It also, on its own, because it is food, triggers Void. And we get to draw a card off of it when it does. So yeah, this should be in our food section. And so now it is. Great, Nutrient Block. Also very funny. Next we have Village Rites. A single black. I love the Strixhaven Mystical Archive art, which is why I'm using this one. You could use Corrupted Conviction, which is the functional reprint of Village Rites, but it's pretty simple. Pay a black, as an instant, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So turn one of your creatures into 2 cards, and trigger Void in the process. Just 1 black. Next we have Wayfarer's Bauble. For 1 generic, we get a lander, essentially. This is what lander tokens actually are. For 2 generic, tap and sack, we search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tap and shuffle. Do we need to ramp ourselves? Maybe. This is a little bit of a cheap ramp piece, but more importantly, it's an artifact that we've put into play and then has left the battlefield, so it lets Alpharael's ability trigger. We've seen Witch's Oven, and now let's see Deadly Dispute, which is sort of a better Village Rites. I think it's better. For 1 and a black, as an additional cost, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and then draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So it does cost 1 more, but it gives us that treasure back, which can act as ramp, that we're sort of putting on layaway. We're spending an extra mana and putting on layaway in the form of this treasure token. However, we can also sacrifice artifacts with this. So maybe we sacrifice the nutrient block, and when it goes to the graveyard, we draw a card from it. So with this, we'll be drawing 3 cards and making a treasure. Pretty all right. Mind Stone is really here as a ramp piece, but we can sacrifice it, so it can trigger Void. For 2 generic, it taps for a colorless. We can also pay 1, tap and sack it to draw a card. So if it's late game and we have plenty of mana, maybe we get this off the battlefield, trigger or qualify our Void ability, and draw from it. Oh, no, goodness. So, next up, I don't know what happened there, is we've seen the Witch's Vanity. Let's talk about Timeline Color. This is an Edge of Eternities card for double black. It's a 2/2 Drix Warlock with haste that says we can cast this card from our graveyard using its warp ability. So this is one of the couple of cards we have in this deck that can warp, which of course qualifies for the trigger of Void without us having to have something leave the battlefield. So warp means if we want, we can cast this card for its warp cost, which for the Timeline Color is a single black and us paying 2 life. If we do, it enters, and at the end step, there's a delayed trigger that will put this in exile, and we can, on a later turn, cast it for just its casting cost. So if we want, we can pay 2 black, and we get a 2/2 with haste, and that's fine. Or we can cast it from our hand or from our graveyard, because of its second ability, by paying a single black and 2 life. It will enter. It has haste, of course. It can attack as a 2/2, and then because we warped it in, at the end of turn, if it has survived, it'll go to exile, and we can cast it again on a later turn for double black again. So we can keep casting this friend over and over, maybe warping it in every turn if it's dying every turn. But at the very least, warping it in can happen during our pre-combat main phase, our first main phase, and that will activate the Void ability. It'll cause Alpharael's Void ability to trigger at the start of combat because we warped this guy in during that first main phase. Then it leaves the battlefield at the end. We get to cast it next turn. Yeah, it doesn't trigger warp that next turn because we're having to cast it from exile, but we've probably got something else that can trigger it. Anyway, this is a great repeated way to do it, and it might even be something we can do every other turn. Next, we have Umbral Caller Zealot. Great card from Edge of Eternities. For 1 and a black, we get a 3/2 Human Cleric. Look at that rate. That says, sacrifice another creature or artifact to surveil 1. That's great. We don't have to pay anything to sacrifice. Just anything we may have on the battlefield, just go ahead and do it. Maybe we have warped in the Timeline Color, and we attack with it or not. It doesn't die, and at the end step, its delayed trigger goes on the stack to put it into exile, and we respond to that with Umbral Caller Zealot, sacrificing the Timeline Color. It goes to the graveyard, we surveil 1, and then next turn, we can warp it back in. This is a great loop to trigger to allow that trigger for Void every single turn. Next up, also from Throne of Eldraine, but not a food card, it's Ayara, First of Locthwain. For triple black, we get a 2/3 Elf Noble that says whenever Ayara or another black creature enters the battlefield under our control, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. So this is a great source of drain. We're going to see more of this soon. But in addition, Ayara can sacrifice another black creature by tapping and draw a card. So she's a repeatable sacrifice outlet that we can't use over and over in the same turn like Umbral Call or Zealot, but it does give us a card draw rather than a Surveil, which I think is a little bit better in this deck. Plus, she's got that great sort of Blood Artist-y effect, this just drain effect for when black creatures enter. After that, we have Burnished Heart. I love this guy. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact Elk that is a 2/2 with the ability pay 3 and sacrifice it to Explosive Vegetation. Search your library for 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, shuffle. So Burnished Heart, we can sacrifice it to itself, and we get land off of it. That's pretty good. It costs us 3, but the classic play pattern for this is to block with the Burnished Heart, blocking a creature that doesn't have trample, and in response to the block before combat damage, activate its ability. That creature's still blocked, and we've got more land. However, in this deck, we're likelier to do it on our turn, so as to trigger, or to, I keep saying trigger, so as to make active the trigger for Void that Alpharael has. We do this during our first main, get some more lands, then Alpharael can attack and, munch on our opponent's life totals. After that, we have Crowded Crypt. What a cool card. For 2 and a black, we have an artifact that taps for black, so it's a manalith for black. That also says whenever a creature you control dies, put a corpse counter on Crowded Crypt. We're going to have a lot of creatures of ours dying. And then for 4 and double black, tap and sacrifice the Crowded Crypt. We create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed for each corpse counter on Crowded Crypt. A zombie token with Decayed means that a decayed creature cannot block, and if it attacks, we sacrifice it at the end of combat. So that sacrifice at the end of combat isn't triggering Void at the time we need it to, or activating Void at the time we need it to, because it's happening after combat rather than before. But sacrificing the Crypt sure gets Void online. And now we have a bunch of 2/2 zombies. We can't attack with them now because they're summoning sick, and they're decayed, and they're gross. So what do we use these things for? We sacrifice them on later turns to make Void active. We've seen our Dubious Delicacy. Now let's look into the pit. For 2 and a black, we have an enchantment that says you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast spells from the top of your library by sacrificing a non-land permanent in addition to paying their other costs. So this gives us a sacrifice outlet that we have to pay for every turn, but when we pay for it, we're paying for it by casting spells. Obviously, if there's a land on top of our library, we can't do anything with that. But if we have a good spell on top of our library, we can sacrifice a permanent that will trigger or will activate Alpharael's Void ability, and we get whatever that permanent is. Maybe we're casting Crowded Crypt, and we immediately have the ability to tap for black. Maybe we're flashing in this Dubious Delicacy, because it still has flash on the top of our library. Pretty good times. Next is Pitiless Plunderer from Rivals of Ixalan. Love this guy. Pitiless Plunderer is interesting on this section because it's a 3 and a black, 1/4 human pirate that says whenever another creature you control dies, make a treasure token. Treasure tokens, of course, are tap, sack the artifact, and make add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So the Pitiless Plunderer doesn't actually trigger Void, or activate Void, get Void online. But the treasure tokens sure do. So all of these other things where our creatures are dying, when the Pitiless Plunderer sees that, we're going to get a treasure token, and we can hold on to that treasure token until a turn when we either need the mana, it's good ramp, or when we just need to activate that Void ability. So we crack a treasure ahead of combat. We maybe use the mana, or we maybe don't, but either way, a non-land permanent has left the battlefield, so Void will work. We've seen our Cirith Ungol Patrol. Again, apologies for this name. Now here's Gift of Doom. I think this card is so cool in this deck. Gift of Doom is 4 and a black for an aura that gives enchanted creature Death Touch and Indestructible. However, it has Morph, which means we can play Gift of Doom as a face-down card. It's a 2/2 creature with no name, and it costs us 3 generic mana to do that. We pay 3 generic while this is in our hand, we put the card face down, it's a 2/2 creature, no name, nothing other than the 2/2 stats. Except that we can morph it, which means by paying its morph cost, which is sacrifice another creature, which is to say, get Void online, we can then flip this 2/2 creature over, and it doesn't use the stack. This happens as fast as we want it to. We have to have priority, but other than that, we can do it anytime we want. And when it's turn faced up, you may attach it to a creature. So this is a way to sacrifice a creature when it doesn't look like we have a sack outlet on the battlefield, thereby getting Void online. And it's in the deck so that we can give Alpharael Death Touch and, more importantly, Indestructible. So Alpharael is now a creature that's able to attack. When he attacks, he triggers his Void ability. Our opponent that's defending is going to lose all that life, and now they have to decide, do I even want to block this guy? Because he's indestructible anyway, and he has Death Touch, so anything I block him with is going to die. Unless it too is indestructible. So I think Gift of Doom is really cool. It's probably even worth paying the 4 and a black just to make Alpharael have Death Touch and Indestructible, but it's more cool to pay 3 and then sacrifice a creature and have it go through the morph process. I think this is just a really neat card that people are not going to expect in this deck. Finally, we have, I think the most expensive card I've put in the deck is Cauldron Complete. For 7 generic mana, we have a legendary equipment that equips for 7. It itself is indestructible, and it gives equipped creature +5/+5, first strike, trample, indestructible, haste, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a creature, exile that creature. Remember, Cauldron Complete gives the equipped creature first strike. So it does first strike damage to a creature, and if that creature didn't die from, Cauldron Complete having also given the creature +5/+5, the creature gets exiled. So even if, there's like regular strike damage that maybe would hurt somehow, even though Cauldron Complete gives the equipped creature indestructible. In any case, lots going on with this, and it tramples over. So being able to attack with, let's say, Alpharael, because that's the intention, Alpharael becomes a 5/5 first strike trampler, so he's going to maybe do damage to our opponent even after doing damage to the creature, at which point that creature gets exiled. And Alpharael is indestructible and has haste, might as well. Not to mention having that ward ability that he already has. All of this is great, and it's in here to make Alpharael protected. We need to protect our commander. We don't want to have to keep recasting our 5-mana commander, especially because he's going to draw some fire due to his big splashy ability. But also, Cauldron Complete has Living Weapon. Living Weapon means when this equipment enters, we make a black Phyrexian Germ creature token that is a 0/0 creature, and then attach Cauldron Complete to it. So that 0/0 Germ doesn't die immediately because it is being created as part of an ability, and that same ability equips Cauldron Complete. So state-based actions aren't checked until Cauldron Complete is equipped to the Germ. So essentially, we're paying 7 mana to get a 5/5 creature with first strike, trample, indestructible haste, and the triggered ability on combat damage to a creature. We can then later equip it to Alpharael, and when we do, that Germ is going to be a 0/0 and it will die, which activates Void for us. So we play Cauldron Complete on our turn, and we activate Void some other way, hopefully, while we attack with Alpharael. Then next turn, we equip Cauldron Complete, and the act of doing that causes the Germ to die, which also activates Alpharael's Void ability. And now Alpharael is a big, scary thing that's protected, and yeah, obviously if someone casts Farewell, we're going to lose a bunch of stuff, but that's true of everyone. With Cauldron Complete on our commander, it's 7 to play and 7 to equip, but, if we want splashy stuff, this is the way we're doing it. So that is our Void section. We've got, 20 things that are triggering or able to qualify for Void in this deck? That's a fifth of our deck. It's all right. That's not even counting, however, all of the spells that are removal spells that you'll see soon, and all of the spells we've already seen that create food, which can also get Void online. So we really don't have to worry about Alpharael's Void ability not being able to trigger, except perhaps early game. So let's last look at the third part of our game plan, which is Drain. This is the little bit of aristocrats that I mentioned. And we're going to start with Cauldron Familiar, which is the card that cares about food I mentioned, but doesn't actually make food. So Cauldron Familiar is a single black mana for a 1/1 cat that says when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. And if we sacrifice a food as part of this ability, not just whenever we sacrifice a food, we can sacrifice a food in order to return Cauldron Familiar from our graveyard to the battlefield, which is to say it will come in and the first ability will trigger. So we saw the Witch's Oven in this deck. If you weren't playing Magic when Throne of Eldraine was in Standard, especially early on, maybe you don't remember the Cat Oven combo. The cat comes in, our opponent loses a life and we gain a life, or all of our opponents lose a life and we gain a life. Then we tap the oven to sacrifice the cat, making a food. Then we sacrifice the food during our opponent's end step to bring the cat back, and it comes in and drains some of a life again. This is Commander, so we don't get to do the thing where you have multiple cats and multiple ovens, but we can live the dream. Cauldron Familiar is here to annoy our opponents yet again. Thanks, 2019. So we've seen Killing Wave and how it can drain our opponents because they have to pay life if they want not to lose their creatures. Warlock class is one of the best cards in our deck for Alpharael. It's a class enchantment, which means it comes in and it has this top ability since we've cast it for just the 1 black. And while it's in play, we can pay 1 and a black to level it up to level 2 and it gains the second ability. Once it's level 2, we can also pay 6 and a black to level it up to level 3. And leveling up is always at sorcery speed. So what does it do? The first ability is, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. So it just drains our opponents for life if creatures died. Not always do we have creatures dying on our turn. Sometimes we just have food going away. But a lot of the time we're going to have things dying because that helps Void be online. Next, when this class becomes level 2, look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of them in your hand and the rest in your graveyard. So this is giving us a little selection, letting us draw a card, sort of a black anticipate. Finally, for 6 and a black, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. I know you're thinking, wait, does that mean what I think it does? Yes, it does. So if we are at level 3 and Alpharael has, we've activated, or we've gotten Void on board somehow, and Alpharael attacks, unless that opponent somehow stifles those triggers or gets Warlock class off the battlefield, that opponent's dead. Because Alpharael's trigger will resolve during the declare attacker step. They'll lose half their life, the defending player will. Then at the end step, Warlock class will trigger and they'll lose the other half of their life. So unless they can, gain more life in the meantime. But remember, if Alpharael is not blocked, let's say they had 40 life and no blockers, Alpharael attacks, they go from 40 to 20, then they go from 20 to 17 from Alpharael's power, and now they've lost 23 life, so Warlock class says they're going to lose another 23 life. Good luck to them. So this is a lot of mana investment. It's fully 10 mana to get to this level, but 100% worth it because it just kills people dead, assuming no interaction, and assuming Alpharael can attack and have his Void ability go off. It's not hard to do. Next we have Consuming Corruption. For double black, this is an instant from Modern Horizons 3 that says it deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and we gain X life, where X is the number of swamps we control. This is a little bit more of a removal spell than a drain spell, but we are gaining life from it, and that's worth it to us. Plus, it can hit planeswalkers. Pretty nice. Next we have Exsanguinate. Love this card. For X and double black, and I'm glad they reprinted this in Foundations, we have a sorcery that says each opponent loses X life, you gain life equal to the life lost this way. So if X is 3, all of our opponents lose 3 life, and we gain 9. That's pretty good. This might just kill our opponents if we have enough mana, or we've gotten them low enough with Alpharael. Next we have Zulaport Cutthroat. For a generic and a black, we get a 1/1 human rogue ally that says whenever it or another creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. This is our little Blood Artist effect for the deck. That's actually more like a Blood Artist on a body. It just only triggers for our creatures. We've seen Ayara and how Ayara can drain people whenever our black creatures enter the battlefield. But what about Bastion of Remembrance? This is 2 and a black for an enchantment that when it enters, it makes a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and whenever one of our creatures dies, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. Another Blood Artisty style effect. It basically does what Zulaport Cutthroat does. Next we have Bontu's Monument, the Bontument. For 3 generic mana, we have a legendary artifact that makes our black creature spells cost 1 less, and it says whenever we cast a creature spell, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. So Zulaport Cutthroat actually is a single black. Ayara is still triple black, because it only discounts black spells by 1 generic mana. But when we cast either one of them, all of our opponents lose a life and we gain 1. Pretty okay. We've seen Dubious Delicacy and how it can drain our opponents with its final ability. We've seen Midnight Snack and how we can sacrifice it to drain our opponents. Susurran Voidborn is 2 and a black for a card that has Warp, so it should be in our Void section. So let's go ahead and put it there. Now we've got 21 cards in there, haha. It is 2 and a black for a 2/2 Vampire Soldier that says whenever this creature or another creature or artifact you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this drains our opponents whenever any of our creatures or our artifacts die, including this itself. And remember, die just means move from the graveyard to the battlefield. So when we sacrifice Dubious Delicacy, it's an artifact, Susurran Voidborn is going to trigger, and our opponents will lose a life and we'll gain a life. That's going to happen every time we sacrifice one of our food tokens. Pretty good. Oh no. Don't know what's going on with that. Next up is Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Gary. We love Gary. Gary is 3 and double black for a 2/4 zombie that says when he enters, each opponent loses X life, where X is our devotion to black, and we gain life equal to the amount of life lost this way. So similar to Exsanguinate, if everyone loses 3, we're gaining 9, assuming 3 opponents. But what is devotion? Devotion means you look at all your permanents in play, and you count up the number of black pips in their casting costs. That total is your devotion. So if all we have is a Dubious Delicacy, and we play Gary, our devotion is 3, from 1 black pip here and 2 here. So each of our opponents will lose 3, and we'll gain 9, assuming, of course, 3 opponents. So Gary is a lot of fun in this deck, because we're playing mono black. Why wouldn't we? Next up is Sir Conrad the Grim, who, for 3 and double black, we have a 5/4 legendary human knight that says whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent, and we can pay 1 and a black to make each player mill 1 card. So let's parse all this. Whenever another creature dies, that means any creature on the battlefield, whether we control it or not, other than Sir Conrad deals the damage to each of our opponents. Whenever a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, which is to say, maybe with this mill ability, maybe with someone discarding it. Anytime a creature goes to the graveyard, either by dying or going to the graveyard in a different way, Sir Conrad's going to do damage to them. Or if somehow one of our creatures leaves our graveyard, maybe we have a reanimate spell, maybe our opponent casts Living Death, Sir Conrad is going to trigger on all of those things. So yeah. Next up is Massacre Worm. For 3 and triple black. This is one of our kind of wraths. It's a 6/5 worm. It's a Phyrexian worm now, actually, because of the Phyrexian creature update. Yes, now it's a Phyrexian worm. So when it enters, creatures our opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn, so it might kill a bunch of creatures. But whether it kills them then or some other way, however they may die, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So lots of different ways for us to kill our opponent's creatures, or for our opponents to kill each other's creatures. Maybe Killing Wave is able to kill off some of our opponent's creatures. They sacrifice them, and Massacre Worm drains them for 2 life for each creature. So if we were to say Killing Wave for X = 2, it's essentially you're going to lose 2 life if your creature dies, or in order to keep it alive. So what would you prefer? Massacre Worm is gross. So those are the cards that mostly make up our game plan. We have a few other cards that are meant to contribute to the game plan, but before we get into them, let's talk about these sections of support, starting with card advantage. And I just use the word draw here. It doesn't mean all of these cards are draw spells. It just is a shorthand for me to use for card advantage spells. So we've seen a lot of these. Nutrient Block, when it goes to the graveyard, we can draw a card. Village Rites lets us sacrifice a creature to draw 2. Warlock class's second level lets us look at the top 3 and put 1 in our hand. That's not drawing a card, but it is card advantage. Deadly Dispute lets us sacrifice an artifact or creature, and we draw 2 cards in addition to making a treasure. Mind Stone, we can sack to draw a card. Ayara, we can sack other black creatures to draw cards. Foreboding Fruit is a draw spell. Into the Pit lets us play off the top of our library. Again, not a draw spell, not a draw effect either, but it lets us play cards we don't have in our hand, so more card advantage. Next is Morbid Opportunist, something we haven't seen. For 2 and a black, it's a 1/3 human rogue from Midnight Hunt that says whenever 1 or more creatures die, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So that's once each turn. So if opponent A attacks opponent B and some creatures die in that combat, our Morbid Opportunist will draw us a card, but only once during that turn. Then during our turn, if we sacrifice something, we'll draw a card. If something else dies that same turn, the ability only triggers once each turn. But it's possible we could be drawing 4 cards every turn cycle. Not likely, but you never know. Good repeatable card draw. Speaking of which, Phyrexian Arena from Foundations now. For 1 and double black, we have an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose a life. We don't need our life as much as we need these cards. Our life is just there in service to reducing our opponent's life. We're not worried about it. Being able to draw 2 cards a turn rather than 1, yeah, that's worth a life every turn. Next we have Solemn Simulacrum. This is the Sad Robot. For 4 generic mana, we get a 2/2 artifact golem that does 2 things. When it enters, we Rampant Growth. When it dies, we draw a card. So this helps us get our swamps into place so that we can actually cast our spells. And then when it dies, either because we used it to block, or we attacked with it, or maybe we just sacrificed it to something like Deadly Dispute, we'll draw a card off of that. Reliable friend. We've seen our Cirith Ungol Patrol, which can repeatedly sacrifice creatures to draw cards and make food. Now let's talk about the Speed Demon. The Speed Demon is 3 and double black for a 5/5 legendary demon with flying and trample. So a 5/5 Flampler for 5. With Start Your Engines. This is from Ether Drift, of course. Start Your Engines means if you have no speed, you now have speed 1. Each time on your turn that an opponent loses life, only once each turn, your speed goes up. So if our opponents are drained for half their life, for example, that's losing life. And then our speed goes up. It's only once on each of our turns, but pretty good. And then, at the beginning of your end step, you draw X cards and lose X life, where X is your speed. So even if we don't do anything on the turn we cast the Speed Demon besides cast it, our speed is 1. So at the end of that turn, we're going to draw X cards and lose X life. We're going to draw a card and lose 1 life. But in all likelihood, we're going to play the Speed Demon and then cause our opponents to lose some life either by attacking with Alpharael or some other way. So at the end of turn, we're going to lose 2 life and draw 2 cards. Pretty great. And having a 5/5 flyer with trample on top of it, I guess, that's all right. Transmutation Font, of course, can draw us cards because it can make clues, but also it can tutor for something. That's card advantage. And then Voidforged Titan is a 4 and a black 5/4 robot warrior artifact with its own void ability at the beginning of your end step. So this triggers at the end step as opposed to Alpharael's attack trigger. If Void, a non-land permanent, left the battlefield your turn or a spell was warped this turn, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So more drawing cards at the end of your turn. Maybe this is not as good as the Speed Demon, but it's one more thing. And just like the Speed Demon, these are creatures that we can sacrifice to things. Plus, this is a little bonus to when we're triggering Void or activating Void, qualifying Void, whatever we want to call it, for Alpharael. Just a little bit of something extra for us. So those are our card advantage spells. Let's go to our acceleration. Everyone knows Soul Ring. Costs 1, taps for 2. It's worth putting in our deck. We've talked about Wayfarer's Bauble, which not only lets us Rampant Growth in black for just 1 more mana that we could spend on a different turn, but also it qualifies for Void by being a permanent that leaves the battlefield. Arcane Signet is a 2-mana rock that taps for black. That's a good rate. We'll even do it when it's tapped, which is what Charcoal Diamond is. It's a 2-mana rock that taps for black but comes in tapped. Not as good as Arcane Signet, but we've got twice the number of 2-mana rocks this way. Deadly Dispute, as we know, makes treasure. It is ramp, or rather it is acceleration, even if it's temporary. Mind Stone is another 2-mana rock, even though it doesn't tap for black. We can use it for generic mana costs. Bontu's Monument is acceleration in the sense that it discounts our black creature spells. That's not all of our spells, but it's something. Burnished Heart can be sacrificed to go find 2 swamps, put them on the battlefield tapped. That's ramp. Crowded Crypt is a mana rock, taps for black. Endurance Bobblehead is in here. I think this is a really cool inclusion from the Fallout decks. For 3 generic mana, this is an artifact bobblehead that taps for 1 mana of any color, so it's just as good as Crowded Crypt in that way. But also, for 3 and tap, up to X target creatures we control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn, where X is the number of bobbleheads we control as we activate this ability. Activate only as a sorcery. So, in general, this is the only bobblehead in the deck. This is a way for us to pay 3 and tap this to give Alpharael +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. That's worth it. And every turn we're not using it for that, we're using it to add mana. Pretty good. We've seen our Pitiless Plunderer and how he can make treasure for us, and of course the Sad Robot, when it enters, will rampant growth us. So that's our acceleration. Let's talk about interaction. Embrace Oblivion, we've seen already. It can get our Void ability online by sacrificing something, but it destroys a creature or spacecraft. Tragic Trajectory is another Void card. It costs a single black, it's a sorcery, and it gives target creature -2/-2 until end of turn, much like Savor does. However, if we've already qualified for Void when we cast this, that creature gets -10/-10 instead. So maybe we cast this during our pre-combat main phase. We sacrifice a food in order to make sure that Alpharael's Void is online. Then we cast Tragic Trajectory to give -10/-10 to one of the creatures on our opponent's battlefield, or board I should say, before Alpharael attacks, just to clear the road for him. Or we could cast this during our second main when our opponent doesn't know that we have this more powerful sorcery speed kill spell. So it's flexible, even though it's at sorcery speed, and it works great in our deck. Next, I really like Accursed Marauder from Modern Horizons 3. For 1 and a black, we get a 2/1 zombie warrior that says, when it enters, each player sacrifices a non-token creature. That means us too. So we cast this, and each of our opponents is having to sacrifice a creature. They can't sacrifice a token, but we can sacrifice either the Accursed Marauder or something else. But if we sacrifice the Marauder, what we're doing is we're paying 1 and a black to make all of our opponents sacrifice a non-token creature, and for us to activate Void. That's pretty great, pre-combat. We've seen Bumbleflower's Sharepot and how we can sacrifice it, which of course again activates Void, to destroy an online permanent. That's good removal. Consuming Corruption, of course, is removal, like we talked about it, by doing damage to a creature or planeswalker. This is our way of addressing planeswalkers. Savor, like we mentioned before, is -2/-2 to a creature. Witch's Vanity can destroy a creature with mana value 2 or less. Dubious Delicacy can give a creature -3/-3. Feed the Cauldron, a creature with mana value 3 or less gets destroyed. Gumdrop Poisoner can give a creature -X/-X until end of turn. Now Withering Torment is 2 and a black for an instant from Duskmourn that destroys a creature or an enchantment, and we lose 2 life. So it's a murder that costs a little bit less restrictively, I suppose, maybe not in our deck. It does cost us 2 life, but it can also hit enchantments. I think this is better in this deck than Feed the Swarm, even though it costs an extra mana, simply because of its flexibility with respect to only having to lose 2 life. Like, we don't have to worry that we're taking out our opponent's Galta and it costs us 12 life. Only 2. We've seen Bake into a Pie, destroy target creature. Voracious Fellbeast is making our opponents sacrifice creatures. And of course, Cauldron Complete, whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a creature, that creature gets exiled. So lots of good interaction here. Mostly with creatures, but we want things to get off the battlefield so we can attack with our commander and not have to worry about being blocked. We're going to look at the Wraths now, which we've already seen actually. Massacre Worm, of course, we call a Wrath because it can kill everything with toughness of 2 or less. And Killing Wave is often like a partial Wrath, or if we put enough into X, it could be a much more powerful Wrath. We might want to pay 6 mana for it. Are our opponents who are playing token decks going to pay 6 life for every single token in order to keep it? No, we're going to wipe the board of basically everything but commanders, or everything but a couple of things. Maybe we have a life gain opponent and it doesn't work as well on them, but no strategy is perfect, and Killing Wave is a lot of fun. In any case, it also, just like with Massacre Worm, is likely to put Alpharael's Void ability online. So that is our support. Let's take a look at the last few contributing factors to our game plan. So we've seen Warlock class. This is in the synergy section because it can just kill an opponent if we've got it at level 3. That is similar to Wound Reflection. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So this is 6 mana, whereas Warlock class we would have had to pay 10 mana over the course, to be fair, of multiple turns to get to a similar, the same effect. But Wound Reflection is just very powerful, and again can make Alpharael's attacks into just this opponent loses the game. I chose the Doctor Who printing of this because it's the cheapest one by far, so still works just like anything else. And Doctor Who's cool. We also have Unstoppable Slasher. For 2 and a black, we get a 2/3 zombie assassin with Death Touch that says when Unstoppable Slasher deals combat damage to a player, that player loses half their life rounded up. So this is the same effect as Alpharael, but it doesn't require Void, but it does have to connect with the player. So we have an opponent with 40 life, Unstoppable Slasher attacks, and let's say is not blocked because it has Death Touch perhaps. That opponent goes to 38, and then Unstoppable Slasher's second ability triggers, and that opponent goes to 19. So having a little bit of redundancy in the form of a card that, it's a Death Toucher, so our opponents are likely to treat this as removal bait. They'll spend their kill spells on this, maybe instead of our commander, perhaps not. But in any case, Unstoppable Slasher also says that when it dies, if it had no counters on it, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control with 2 stun counters on it. So this thing doesn't die for good unless it's killed twice. That's pretty great. Being able to come back with it later and keep menacing our opponent, that's all right. In addition, maybe we attack into an open board with Unstoppable Slasher and Alpharael after Void has been gotten online. Alpharael will trigger. Maybe our 40 life opponent goes to 20 life. Then they both do damage. So that's 3 and 2. So our opponent goes to 15. And Unstoppable Slasher triggers, and they lose half their life rounded up, which is 8, and they go to 7. From 40 life to 7 in one turn. This is Magical Christmas Land, but maybe we'll get there. The next section is Fodder. Fodder is cards that are doing multiple things for us, but specifically give us creatures that we can sacrifice, or a way to have something to sacrifice. These are just little bonuses. Like Cauldron Familiar, we have so many foods in this deck, it's fine if we need to sacrifice this to one of our sacrifice effects, because we can always later sacrifice a food, also getting our Void ability online, and bring Cauldron Familiar back, which will drain our opponents for 1. So useful fodder in this cat. We also have Orcish Medicine, 1 and a black, for an instant that says target creature gains your choice of lifelink or indestructible until end of turn. So we generally put this on our commander and give him indestructible, just to protect him. But also, Orcish Medicine says amass Orcs 1. So we make a 0/0 black Orc army creature token and put a 1/1 counter on it. It's also an Orc. So it's just make a 1/1. That 1/1 is here, you can tell from it being in the fodder category, it's for us to sacrifice it. So having a spell that protects our commander that comes with a free token that we can throw away seems good. Like we've seen before, Timeline Color, we can keep sacrificing it and warping it back in. Both of those will trigger or will put Void online for us. Crowded Crypt, whenever our creatures die, we get corpse counters on this. So we're going to be able to eventually sacrifice it and make some zombie tokens with Decayed, which we already talked about how they are fodder. Experimental Confectioner, of course, when we sacrifice our foods, we make rats, which are fodder. And Solemn Simulacrum, the Sad Robot got into this category because he's done a good job by coming in. Now he needs to do a good job by dying and drawing us a card. You're not in this category because I don't like you, buddy. You're in it because I trust you. Finally, our last section of spells is our protection section. These are things that keep our commander alive or safe at least, or on the battlefield, so we don't have to recast him too many times. First is Kaya's Ghost Form. Great card from War of the Spark. For a single black, we get an aura that enchants a creature or a planeswalker, so it's going to enchant our commander, that says when enchanted permanent dies or is put into exile, return that card to the battlefield under your control. It doesn't even come back tapped, like a lot of these effects do. So this will get through any kind of kill spell, any kind of exile effect. Kaya's Ghost Form is excellent. It does come out at sorcery speed, which is not quite as good as, say, Orcish Medicine, but we can certainly get some value out of it for just one black. Next is Agent of the Shadow Thieves from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate. For 1 and a black, we have a legendary enchantment background that says commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. On this creature, it gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. What this means is, while this is in play and Alpharael is in play, Alpharael has a second trigger on attack, which is when Alpharael attacks, if we are attacking the opponent or one of the opponents that has the most life, either has the most life or is tied for the most life among opponents, then Alpharael gets a 1/1 counter, Death Touch, and Indestructible until end of turn. So protection every turn, not between those turns, but every time he would attack, which is the time we really want him to have that protection because we don't want him to die from being blocked. In addition, he has Death Touch when this happens. So it's one more reason we might not be blocked, which we don't really care about that much if we're indestructible, but it gives us a way for our opponents to say, well, I'm going to throw my big creature in front of yours just so I don't take combat damage as well. And we say, well, your big creature's going to die thanks to the Death Touch. And they'll say, oh no, I wish I would have read the card. And we say, do you want to take it back? And they say, I do. And we say, tough. No, I'm kidding, of course. You play with your pod the way your pod works. Next up is Maximum Overdrive from Aetherdrift. 1 and a black, for an instant, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. It is exactly the effect that Agent of the Shadow Thieves gives, but we aren't required to attack a specific player. So Maximum Overdrive, just a great one of these spells that is a black spell that grants Indestructible. Plus, the counter helps and Death Touch helps. I have a lot of other cards that are these sort of like grants Indestructible black cards, or the scam cards and such that are that kind of give a similar effect to Kaya's Ghost Form, all in the considering section below. What it is worth noting, I should mention, I guess, with Agent of Shadow Thieves, you have to attack either the player with the most life or the one with that's tied for the most life. One of the ones that's tied for the most life. Among your opponents, that is. You can still have the greatest life at the battle at the table and have this trigger work. When it does, presumably, Alpharael is going to have a trigger that's going to reduce that opponent's life. We need to make sure that we stack these triggers appropriately, because this is an intervening if clause. So whenever this creature attacks, there's this if clause right here. If this is not satisfied when we attack, the ability won't trigger at all. However, it also checks during resolution. So if let's say we have 2 opponents that are at 40 life and 1 opponent that is at 50 life. If we attack the opponent with 50 life and we have this trigger go on the stack and Alpharael's Void trigger go on the stack, because let's say we've sacrificed a food, and we're attacking the opponent with 50 life. We'll have these two abilities go on the stack at the same time, and we can order them however we want. But if we put this one on top, then we're going to be able to say, oh, it looks like you're attacking, and no opponent has more life than that player, so Alpharael will get a +1/+1 counter and gain Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. Then the Void trigger will happen, and that player with 50 life will go to 25. However, if we stacked those triggers the opposite direction, the first thing that would happen would be Alpharael would say, haha, I'm attacking you, you go from 50 life to 25. And Agent of the Shadow Thieves would say, well, so you are attacking, but that opponent does not currently have more life than any other opponent. So the rest of this will not work. Intervening if clauses will check both when it should trigger, and if it wouldn't, it doesn't at all, none of it triggers, and when it resolves. So we want to make sure that with Agent of the Shadow Thieves, we stack the triggers appropriately each time, which is to say, this all has to happen prior to our opponent losing that life. May not be relevant, but you never know. We've seen Orcish Medicine. It can make our commander indestructible, or even give lifelink if we really want to. And we get an Orc. Swiftfoot Boots are great in this deck. 2 mana for an artifact equipment, equips for 1, gives our equipped creature hexproof and haste. So giving Alpharael hexproof can stop about half of the things that we're worried about. And remember, even if he doesn't have hexproof, he does have that ward ability. So if our opponent only has 1 card left in hand, and it's a kill spell, they might cast it, and now they can't discard a card at random from their hand, which means their kill spell is countered. We've seen Endurance Bobblehead, and how it can give our creature, our commander indestructible, or any creature, I suppose. We've seen Gift of Doom, so cool, gives Death Touch and Indestructible. And Cauldron Complete also gives Indestructible. So lots of ways to protect our commander and keep the party going. So let's go to our last sections, which are lands. We're going to talk about our lands pretty quickly, because 25 of our 38 lands are swamps. We want to be able to cast our spells. All of our spells are black unless they're colorless. So yeah, we need a lot of basics. We also have these 2 ramp lands. Myriad Landscape does come in tapped, but it taps for colorless, and we can pay 2, tap and sack it to search our library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type, which is to say 2 swamps, and then put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. This is slow, but it's ramp on a land, because we start with 1 land and we end up with 2. We also have Temple of the False God. Not everyone likes this card, but I think it's great, because it's a soul ring on a land. It just doesn't work until we have 4 other lands in play. Keep in mind, it doesn't tap for any mana at all during that time. So it's not ideal if we draw it early, unless we have plenty of other lands in hand, or in play, I guess. But if we have it in our opening hand, and there's, let's say, 3 other lands in hand, I would keep that hand probably. You know, the likelihood of us getting more lands, maybe one of them's a Myriad Landscape, but we can really get into it. If this is one of 4 lands we have in hand, we just don't play this on the first 3 turns, and we might be able to get there even without it. I think this land is good. It's just not super competitive. But if you're playing Commander, why are you playing competitively? No shade. All right, we also have 11 utility lands. So let's go through these. Access Tunnel taps for colorless, but we can also pay 3, tap it, and give target creature with power 3 or less unblockable until end of turn. So yes, that won't work if we've put some +1/+1 counters on Alpharael, which we have a few sources of, but we only have a few sources of those. So this is a way of protecting our commander. We're not so concerned with the 3 damage he's going to do. We're concerned with the ability for him to survive combat by not being blocked. Access Tunnel is a great way of doing that. But if we want something a little bit bigger that'll work when Alpharael is pumped up, we have Rogue's Passage. It's the same land, except that it costs 1 more to activate the unblockable thing, and it doesn't require the creature to have power 3 or less. So 2 different ways to make Alpharael unblockable. We have Castle Lochthwain. This is a great way for us to draw more cards if we're desperate to do so. Castle Lochthwain will enter tapped unless we control a swamp. We have lots of swamps, 25. And also, Castle Lochthwain says we can tap it for black, or we can pay 1 and double black and tap it to draw a card and lose life equal to the number of cards in our hand. A lot of the times, that means 1 life, because our hand is empty. That's pretty great for the Castle Lochthwain. Demolition Field. I don't typically include land destruction in my decks, but I almost always put a Demolition Field in there, because you never know when our opponent's going to have something that's just a problem for us. Maybe they have their own Rogue's Passage, and their commander is really big, and we're going to die to commander damage if we don't get rid of it. We don't make it unable to be unblockable. Or maybe they have a Glacial Chasm because they're that guy. We might take... so that's why I run Demolition Field, because it can tap for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that opponent controls, and then they get to go find a basic and put it on the battlefield untapped, and so do we. So we're not actually down a land from this. We're not actually down 3 mana either, because we are tapping Demolition Field plus 2 other lands, let's say, to activate this, but we're getting an untapped basic back. So we tapped 3 lands, but we have 1 untapped at the end, so it's like we only tapped 2. Pretty okay. Next up is High Market, which I've used the Stellar Sights printing for. High Market is just a land that taps for colorless, or we can tap it and sacrifice a creature to gain a life. We don't care that much about the life, but this is a way for us to trigger or to activate Void, to get Void online. And the little bit of life gain, not bad. Maybe we're sacrificing a rat from Experimental Confectioner. Next up is Lazotep Quarry. What a cool card this is. This is a desert. It taps for colorless. We can tap it and sacrifice a creature to add 1 mana of any color. So if we really need black, we can sacrifice one of our creatures. But either way, maybe we don't care about the mana, we just care about sacrificing the creature to get Void online. But in addition, we can pay X and 2 and tap and sacrifice a desert. This is our only desert, but we can do this card. To exile target creature card with mana value X from our graveyard and make a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. We can only do this as a sorcery. This is eternalizing a creature in our graveyard. So let's say it's Experimental Confectioner. We've lost it, we want it back. We pay 5 mana, because 3 is the mana value of it, plus 2, tap and sacrifice Lazotep Quarry, and we get a 4/4 black zombie version of an Experimental Confectioner. So this is how we can get things back from our graveyard if we really want to. We also have Leech-Ridden Swamp. It is itself a swamp, but it enters tapped, and we can pay a black and tap, and each opponent loses a life. We activate only if we control 2 or more permanents. Do we need a tiny little bit more drain? Well, we have a tiny little bit more drain here in Leech-Ridden Swamp. But I mean, if we have 2 mana left over at the end of our turn, hopefully one of them is Leech-Ridden Swamp. We just tap the other one, and this, each opponent loses a life. Pretty okay. We do that during our opponent to the right's end step, just a tiny little bit of extra. Little dribs and drabs. Next up we have Midgar City of Mako from the Final Fantasy set. This is a tap land that can tap for black, which is not ideal, but it comes with a sorcery. Reactor Raid for 2 and a black is an adventure. We can sacrifice an artifact or creature, so easy way to get Void online. And if we do, we draw 2 cards. It is an expensive Village Rites, but it comes with a tap land that we can later play from the Adventure Zone, from the Exile Zone. So yeah, we've talked about Rogue's Passage. Let's talk about Susur Secundi, Void Altar from Edge of Eternities. A little expensive for land, but a really cool one. It comes in tapped, it taps for black, and it has Station, which, if you haven't seen Station yet, it means as a sorcery, you can tap another creature you control to put a number of charge counters on this planet equal to the creature's power. So we do that at sorcery speed for each creature, and once Susur Secundi has 12 or more counters on it, it gains the ability to pay 1 and a black, and tap, and pay 2 life, and sacrifice a creature to draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. That's only at sorcery speed. So that's a lot going on there, but it's a way for us to turn creatures into draw, and also to turn creatures into the activate or the qualification for our Void ability. Pretty good. We've seen Castle Lochthwain. Now let's talk about War Room. For War Room, comes in untapped. It can tap for colorless, and then we can pay 3 and tap it and pay an amount of life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity, which is 1. and draw a card. So 3 tap and pay a life to draw a card versus Castle Lochthwain, 3 tap and draw a card by losing life equal to the number of cards in our hand. War Room might be better for us, except for the fact that Castle Lochthwain can tap for black. That might be really relevant. And finally, we have Witch's Cottage. This is a swamp. It enters tapped unless we control 3 or more other swamps. They don't have to be basic swamps. So remember, Leash-Ridden Swamp is also a swamp. And when Witch's Cottage enters the battlefield untapped, we may put target creature card from our graveyard on top of our library. This is the other way in our deck we have to get things back from our graveyard. Yes, it goes on top of our library, we don't get to draw it, but we have lots of ways of drawing cards if we really need it right away. And being able to get back our let's say our Experimental Confectioner again. Probably worth it to us. So that sums up our Alpharael Stonechosen deck, snacking between kills. Again, I am releasing new Edge of Eternities Commander decks every Thursday until the Spider-Man set drops at the end of September. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or a style of deck for that commander. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.